and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Brody Miller joins us, covers LSU for The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at Brody A. Miller. Brody, this is the story that everybody's talking about. I want to talk to you about LSU football, but I got to ask you, as you have sat and watched this from South Louisiana over the last 18 hours or so, Nick Saban last night, Jimbo's response this morning, what do you make of all of it?
I mean, it's pretty unprecedented the way this has turned into pro wrestling between two of the, 5 biggest coaches in the sport. And yeah, I mean, the honest answer is it's entertaining. I mean, I can't tell you how many coaches or people who worked with both of them at LSU, have been just talking today privately about just kind of how crazy this is, but how it's, this has been bubbling. This isn't Kirby and Nick, who had this great relationship. This is as juicy as it gets, and this is going to make this next year or two as compelling as possible. It really is funny how NIL has turned a sport that was getting more and more corporate into pretty much the juicy wild west. It's incredible.
We're all losers in this, and the fact that Steve Spurrier is not still coaching. Don't you think he'd be having a field day with this?
No, he would have been. I mean, I guess Lane Kiffin's not a terrible replacement, but Spurrier would have been the best ever at this. It's too bad.
We were playing around with your wrestling analogy to begin the show today. We decided that Lane Kiffin was – I first said J.R. Ross is like a ringside announcer where he's just kind of throwing jabs in, but it's more of a Jimmy Hart role. I mean, he'll sneak in, throw a punch, throw a chair in the ring, and then back out and just kind of watch the carnage unfold around him. So it's
exactly.
It is absolutely fascinating. I think LSU is fascinating. We're kind of starting to bounce around the league and take like a first look, after spring ball as we get we're about 3.5 months away from the start of the season. And the question that has to be at the top of the list is who's playing quarterback for LSU. As we sit here on, the 19th of May, if you had to lay money, where would you lay your money in terms of starting quarterback for LSU?
Man, it's such a great question because I think the honest answer is I started spring with at least a little confidence, and I think I'm leaving spring with less confidence, not in the quarterbacks themselves, but just because actually I think I'm leaving spring in more confident if this room is pretty darn good, but less confident than ever of who it's going to be because everyone assumes Jaden Daniels wouldn't make this transfer to sit the bench, but there were a lot of times where he didn't look very good this spring, and then we find out, okay, they're reteaching him an entirely new footwork, which, as that is pretty tough to relearn. So it's like, okay. And he also does add things no one else has. I mean, his running ability is pretty special when he turns it on, So nobody else is bringing that. And there might be an argument that when you're not exactly a great team, maybe you need that X-Factor guy. But then you talk to some staff members, and they'll tell you, Garrett Nussmeier maybe had the best spring of any of them. He redshirt freshman, really talented, top 100 recruit, kind of raw last year, and by the way, still probably is a little raw, but his upside is really special, and he does some things that, he makes throws no one else can really make, and he's smart, and I think he's learning. And then Brennan, though, he's the safest of those three. He's the one who you trust him. He knows how to run a team. I think they trust him to make the right decisions the most, and it's not like he's a boring pick either because he averaged 370 yards a game in 3 SEC starts. So it's like, I think if I had to, I'm not trying to be cop out here. If I had to put money right this second, I think part of me might say Jaden Daniels, but man, I just don't know because I think Nussmeier looks really special, and I think Brennan you trust more. At the end of the day, my honest guess is that both two quarterbacks will play quite a bit because I think they want Daniels' legs in there somehow.
Well, the alluded to this when you talked about Miles Brennan. It's clearly a small sample size. But in the sample size that you do have, he was outstanding. Like, he was really, really good. He was not the reason that LSU lost to Mississippi State, 2 years ago in Baton Rouge and just got throttled? He put up good numbers. He put up good numbers in the other starts that he had, and it earned that job a year ago, and now we're like, oh, no, Nussmeier. What we saw from Nussmeier was not any good.
Yep. No, you're right. And again, I don't want to ever judge a quarterback by how they look as a completely raw true freshman thrown into like a start
That's
for
fair.
A terrible team. I'm not going to judge him on that. And shoot, he threw 2 touchdowns or 1 touchdown in that game where you're like, oh shoot, that guy has a chance to be really special. He just also made some really silly mistakes. And I think so much of even bringing Daniels in is about probabilities, right? Because Brennan, yeah, he did earn it. And even more importantly, he looked better each of those 3 starts. Start 1 was good numbers but shaky, and by start 3 just kept looking better. But he's also somebody who has been severely injured for 3 of the last 4 seasons in one capacity or another. So it's like, hey, he's a good player, but how confident are you that he's going to be the guy? And then you bring in Daniels, and it's like, hey, this guy is crazy upside, but how confident are you considering how shaky he looked last year? So all these guys have cases, and they all have downsides, and I think that's why bringing him in was smart, because you're playing the odds a little bit and just kind of figuring out, like, hey, at least one of these guys will be a healthy SEC quarterback.
Brady, is there anything to learn from the way Brian Kelly chose his quarterbacks at Notre Dame that we should be looking at and thinking about in terms of how he's going to choose his starter at LSU?
I do, and I've picked my colleague Pete Sampson, who covers Notre Dame for us, The Athletic. I've picked his brain about this constantly because, yeah, I think there is a lot of looking back at it. I think he has shown that, he does lean more toward experienced quarterbacks, with game day credibility, guys who, are going to – I think he prefers minimizing a risk than he does, upside versus risk and all that. So I do think there's that case might lean more toward a Brennan. Just his history would imply that. He does kind of like a guy who can add a little bit of pocket, but it's hard to use comps because each situation's different, right? Because I think there is a little bit to that notion that LSU is probably going to be a little messy and shaky this year, so maybe you do go with a little more risk because you need it, or you go more safe. I just don't know. But to answer your question, yeah, his history shows he prefers a more experienced, kind of stable quarterback.
I like your word choice there, but I want you to tell me a little bit more. When you say LSU may be a little bit messy and a little bit shaky this year, is there a particular area on the field where you're talking about? I mean, is it starting on the defensive side?
Yeah, I think messy is the right word, just because it's so weird because the top level talent, I don't know, the best 12 best players or whatever you want to say, are really great. They're guys who it's the kind of team where on the right night their first team can beat anybody, right? Like, they are really talented. They have 3-4 potential first round picks. Probably 8 guys who could get drafted relatively high. They got some studs, but they also have a lot of holes that Ogeron left. O-line, while I think it's improved and will be better than last year, is shaky. You're not really confident about any starter there. And then, the secondary is really shaky, where basically all 3 starters are gone. Honestly, the top 4 are gone. Added 4 transfers there who, each one of them, to be clear, in a vacuum, are good additions, right? But I just think you can't act like a transfer is going to be exactly what they were at the last stop, because they're just variables, and there's just uncertainty of changing schools, let alone going to the SEC. So, like, Jarek Bernard Converse from OK State, yeah, it's a no-brainer. It's an all Big 12 corner on one of the best defenses in the country last year, but you just don't know. He's been banged up. Seven Banks from Ohio State, he had a major red flag hip injury that sounds like it was cleared, but still, you just don't know. So I think corner's going to be a big issue. O-line's just always going to be a concern. They essentially don't have a real tight end, so it's like, my answer to that is they are good enough on the right night to beat anybody because their D-line's loaded. The passing game should be really, really good at receiver and quarterback. They have so many strengths, but they also just have depth issues, and I think depth issues usually lead to some embarrassing losses.
Brody, I am not holding you to this. It is not anywhere close to September 3rd. I said it earlier. It's May 19th. But on May 19th, what is a reasonable expectation for LSU in terms of wins?
I think 8-4 is just the right general goal to use, because, and almost to the point of earlier of, you know what, I bet they do win, one top 15 game, because it is LSU. I mean, we've seen it even the last 2 years when they were a disaster, right? They still won 1 or 2 big games. And I think they're probably going to lose, a game they really shouldn't. So I think 8-4 is fair, because it means you probably win about 500 in SEC play or somewhere around that, and it probably means you took care of business against Florida State. I think, and if you're 8-4 in the SEC West, you know what? You're back end top 25, right? Most years. So sure. I think 8-4 is fair. I think the weird thing is, though, and as well as I, the SEC this year is it's in flux, right? It's like Florida's going to be down. Auburn's just in a weird situation. Ole Miss is obviously, as you know, like, there's tons of talent, but that's transfers, so you just never know. And so it's like this weird thing where, other than Bama, there's really no teams that on LSU's schedule that you just know for sure are good. So Is there a scenario where they win 10? Definitely. Like, I could see that, but would I put my money on it? No, just because of all the variables. So I think 8-4 is my prediction.